I didn't believe her could this badge unlock a secret decades old. Said the badge was printed. The name is not in any database. They laughed, shoved her papers back, and sent her to the far end of the base, where no one worked, no one watched, just waves. She stood there in silence, eyes on the sea, hour after hour. No radio, no rank, just stillness until something moved beneath the water. And then every system on the base lit up. A nuclear submarine surfaced just offshore, dark, silent, and transmitted only one thing. Not a flag, not a warning, just a code name. Heron, welcome to Veteran's Voice. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and stay with us till the end. It started with wind, salt-laced and indifferent, pushing across the perimeter fence of Naval Outpost Dagger Blue, an installation so deep in the classified folds of the U.S. Navy that even most internal systems didn't recognize it. Located at the edge of a forgotten coastline, protected by storms and silence, the base existed for one purpose: containment of what no one openly said, and most who were assigned there didn't ask. The guards at the east gate were already restless when she arrived. Civilian jacket, light canvas pack, government issue boots, too clean to be trusted. Her steps were even, quiet, deliberate, but not the kind of deliberate born from pride or urgency, more like someone following the line between orders and memory, like the path itself had been memorized decades ago and never forgotten. She presented the badge. They frowned. One laughed. "Ma'am, this doesn't even look real. Where'd you print this? Kinko's?" No smile. She just held it steady, eyes fixed not on them, but past them toward the sea. The young MP tapped the ID badge against his terminal. Red screen. See? Nothing. This ID isn't valid. I don't even think this name is real. She didn't argue, didn't flinch, just blinked slowly, then looked at the guard tower as if time was wasting. That was the first detail that would haunt them later. That she wasn't surprised. "Orders say I report here," she said, calm as static. "Key South. No attachments, no housing. I stay on base grounds, that's all." The sergeant scratched at his beard. "We don't have a Key South anymore. That platform has been inactive for 5 years." Still, she waited. Still, she stood. They called for clearance. The clearance pinged back with a single line: "Allow access. No questions." And below that, a clearance code none of them had seen before. Ecol Black Zero. Even the sergeant looked uncomfortable now. That kind of code didn't belong to the admin. It didn't belong to logistics. It didn't belong to anyone who showed up alone, without escort, without insignia. That code belonged to someone who outranked the questions. Still, they scoffed, whispered, and laughed when she passed. They issued her a temporary card with a red stripe on it. Civilian observer. The lowest designation. Just enough to move between the mess and her assigned location. They handed her a weathered wristband too, a requirement for non-military presence during red status weeks. She accepted it without protest. And then she walked past the tarmac, past the hangars, past the command tower, all the way down the concrete corridor that led to the old southern pier, abandoned after a storm tore up the supports half a decade earlier. No one went there now. No equipment, no drills, nothing but wind, water, and a rusted platform facing an empty horizon. She stood at the edge alone. She didn't sit, didn't wander, didn't light a cigarette or pull out a phone. She just stood there, arms at her sides, eyes on the waves like they were speaking, like they might at any moment return something the world had forgotten. Behind her, life continued without pause. Inside the base, they joked. The new guy in logistics called her the ghost of the pier. Some said she was probably a lost intel analyst with PTSD dumped by mistake. Others guessed she was one of those civilian contractors who came and went, left behind by a program that had long been shut down. But no one asked, because she didn't talk. And more importantly, she didn't react to the laughter, to the isolation, to the way the cafeteria would run out of hot trays just before she arrived, or how her bunk cot was placed next to the boiler under a leaking pipe. Every time she didn't report, she didn't complain. She just stood there, day after day, sometimes from first light to the edge of night, never deviating, never blinking, when the wind whipped hard enough to peel paint off railings. Just stillness. One corporal got curious. A comms tech named Hanley. He walked by on his way to the maintenance tower and stopped beside her. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. She didn't turn. "Not someone," she said. "Something." He hesitated, halfway between sympathy and confusion. "You know this platform's decommissioned, right? There's no ops here. Nothing coming in." She didn't answer. He shifted awkwardly, then added, "We got coffee back inside." Still nothing. When he walked away, she turned slightly. Not to watch him, but to look over his shoulder toward the dark cut of ocean that never quite stopped moving. The days bled together. Then came the storm. It was sudden, brutal, and not on any of the radar reports. Lightning cleaved the sky in long horizontal arcs, and the ocean roared like something was clawing at it from underneath. The base went into partial lockdown. Off-duty personnel were confined to barracks. Patrols pulled in, but she stayed alone on the edge of Key South. Rain slicing sideways, hair soaked, jacket flapping open, eyes never leaving the waves. A photo taken by a drone operator the next morning, intended as a joke, would later be classified. Because when they zoomed in, her face wasn't fearful. It was ready, like she had been waiting for the storm. When the storm passed, something changed. A low, inaudible hum began pulsing through the lower levels of the comm center. The engineers blamed faulty grounding. Someone said it was the generators. Others blamed the offshore sensor grid. No one could find the source. But the woman at Key South turned for the first time in days and walked back to the mess, sat quietly, ate slowly, then returned to her post. That night, sonar logged a deep signature, a shape moving slowly beneath the shelf. Not a whale, not a sub the Navy knew. It moved like it was waiting. They brought the file to the shift commander. He laughed, tossed it into the pending bin, said it was a glitch, and went back to his coffee. At 400 the next morning, a new line appeared on the internal network. No origin point, just 5 words. "She's still operational." The file disappeared seconds later. No one claimed authorship. No one could trace it. But those who saw it started avoiding Key South. When the Admiral's office was contacted, the response was chillingly simple. No engagement, unless confirmed. Hostile. Quarantine her station. Stand by. And so they did. But no one understood. Not yet. No one understood what she was waiting for. Not yet. The base ran on routine schedules, protocol, and chain of command. Everything from radar pings to toilet flushes is logged in time-coded cycles. So when things began to shift subtly, quietly, it wasn't the officers who noticed first. It was the junior ranks, the night operators, the ones who had to feel the pulse of the base just to survive its silence. It began with the sea. No one could explain why the coastal boys kept flickering offline for 30 seconds at a time, always at night, always at 3:17 sharp. They blamed salt corrosion and firmware desync. But every time they sent a drone to investigate, the system corrected itself before arrival. And always, without exception, at that precise moment, she was already at Key South, standing perfectly still, gaze anchored to the ocean like she was listening to something no one else could hear. Then came the dreams. One of the enlisted guards reported waking in sweat, shaking, convinced he had seen her inside the reactor deck, where no one but engineers were allowed. He said she was wearing a different uniform, no jacket, no ID, Just Black Ops gear, damp with seawater. They laughed it off, blamed the sleep meds. Others said they saw her walking through hangar corridors at hours she was never supposed to be inside. A lieutenant swore he heard footsteps outside the secure comms wing, turned the corner, and found her staring at a blank wall, unmoving, expressionless. When questioned, she said nothing, just blinked, slow and deliberate. Security started logging her movements. She was never seen entering restricted zones, and yet she kept appearing where no one remembered seeing her pass. The digital logs are clean, too clean. Every swipe, every time, stamped flawless, as if someone somewhere was manually curating her presence. The commandant grew impatient. Enough ghost stories, he barked during morning brief. She's a clerical error wrapped in a budget oversight. I want her off my base, but Echo Zero didn't answer him. The clearance code returned again with a second line, this time. Do not reassign. Do not interrupt. She is in place. It was the only time the commandant paused. A moment of breath held in his chest, like some ancient instinct, telling him this wasn't an error. This was containment. Still, resentment grew. Officers hated unanswered questions. Soldiers hated the unease she radiated. She was given nicknames. None flattering. Phantom Lady. Ghost File. The Oracle. But she never responded. Never flinched. Just stood day after day. Always at the same angle on the same platform. Watching the same horizon as if it might rise and speak. Then came the heat signature. A deep sensor drone sent to monitor seafloor movement caught an anomaly 3 meters offshore, too hot for marine life, too slow for a natural current. It wasn't moving like a vessel. It was pulsing, breathing, pausing at intervals that formed a pattern. The tech flagged it for analysis. The next morning, the tech was transferred. No explanation, no replacement. The drone logs were locked behind admin layers, and even the lieutenant commander couldn't access them. And that same night, she arrived at Key South, 10 minutes earlier than usual. That was when the air began to change. No storm, no clouds. But the atmosphere grew heavy. Radios developed static bursts. Personal comms glitched. Even the birds stopped circling the tower. It felt like the silence before a siren, like the world inhaling. It lasted 5 days. On the 6th, something finally cracked. At 211, a blackout hit the east quadrant of the base. Backup generators kicked in after 13 seconds. But those 13 seconds triggered something dormant in every old sailor's bones. Fear. When systems came back online, 6 cameras across the perimeter had been burned. Not fried. Burned. As if something had passed by that shouldn't have. And yet, nothing was recorded except one. Camera number 24, aimed at Key South. The footage showed her standing at the end of the platform. Windless night, jacket still, hair unmoved. And then, at precisely 21,344, her head lifted slightly like someone had spoken her name from the water. No sound, no movement, just that slight tilt, and the platform lights around her dimmed. Not shut off. Not failed. Dimmed. Exactly 40%, as if responding to her presence. The footage ended there. Command flagged it as a coincidence. Light surge, moisture exposure. But the base felt it. Everyone did. The silence deepened. The jokes stopped. And then she moved. It was the first time anyone had seen her leave her station during a storm warning. She walked the full length of the eastern fence. Not fast, not slow, just enough to trigger every patrol sensor one by one, like she was mapping the base by memory. When the MP stopped her, she turned and said quietly, "They'll arrive soon. You should seal the southern gates." The MP blinked. Who? But she was already walking again. By now, even the cynical were watching. The base psychologist tried to question her. She never sat down, just stood at the window, eyes on the fog outside. "You believe something is coming?" the psych asked. Her voice was low, I never stopped believing. From where? She glanced at her reflection in the glass below. That recording, too, would later be pulled from the database. On the evening of the 7th day, as the tide pulled unusually far from the shoreline, several sonar stations along the coast picked up a return signal bouncing off something massive under the water. Something black, soundless, and ancient. No propulsion, no noise, just pressure. The pattern of it, its presence, made trained operators nauseous. And at that exact moment, without a sound, she turned her head toward the radar dome at the top of the base. Inside, 3 operators watched their screens dim for less than a second. Then, just one line of text appeared on their secure interface. Echo Black active. Standby. No one had typed it. And suddenly, no one wanted to be near her. The base entered yellow protocol. Alerts on standby. Non-essential personnel ordered off base. The Coast Guard received no explanation, just a blanket redirect and a corridor clearance across 15 nautical miles. And she stood alone at Key South for the final night, eyes locked on the line where black sea met black sky, still silent and waiting because something was coming. And she had never stopped listening. At 3:00 a.m. sharp, the sea stopped moving. It didn't crash, or churn, or howl. It just stilled as if the water itself had fallen under orders. Along the pier, not a single ripple kissed the rusted concrete. No tide, no wind, no sound. And every radar screen on base Dagger Blue went blank. The silence wasn't natural. It was surgical. Inside the control tower, petty officers tapped their screens harder, adjusted frequency bands, and rechecked antenna relays. Nothing, not even static, just an infinite wall of absence. Calm blackout, one asked. No, another whispered, swallowing hard. It's not us, it's them. At Key South, she stood precisely where she always had. But her posture was different now. Weight balanced on both feet, hands behind her back, as if standing for inspection, for activation, for arrival. And that's when the sky cracked. Not from lightning, but pressure. A rolling, low-frequency boom surged from below the water. So low, it wasn't heard. It was felt in bones, in teeth, in organs. Lights flickered across the base. Backup systems kicked on. And at once, every sonar station within a 100-mile radius lit up with the same alert. Unidentified submerged object. Bearing 180 degrees. Distance 0.7 nautical miles. Size classified. At first, they thought it was a foreign sub. Russian, Chinese. Impossible but plausible. Emergency teams were dispatched. Surface patrols scrambled. The Admiral's line was opened remotely from his quarters off-site. But then came the surface breach. It didn't break the water. It displaced it. Like something too massive to rise, it simply redefined the rules around it. The ocean parted, not in violence, but in awe. A mountain of matte black metal, seamless and silent, emerged from the deep like it had always been there. No hull markings, no light, no sound, and still no communications. Everyone froze. A nuclear submarine had surfaced inside U.S. territorial waters without a call sign, without a ping, without authorization. Every protocol demanded that it be treated as hostile, but no one moved because the woman at Key South had dropped to one knee. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't praying. She was waiting. Then, across every encrypted line on the base, from the command tower to personal data pads, even into systems air-gapped from the external net, a single signal arrived. One string of text. It came not with sound, but presence. It didn't ask, it declared. Codename Lucid Violet. And beneath it, recognition signal stand down. Recall Operation Echo Black. All at once, silence turned to paralysis. Inside the control center, the color drained from the face of Captain Gerald, the ranking officer on duty. He hadn't heard those words in 20 years. He'd only seen them once, buried in a file so deeply classified it required 3 biometric verifications just to view. A file he wasn't supposed to have read, but he had. Echolak wasn't a project. It wasn't a unit. It wasn't even a Black Ops initiative. It was a response. An autonomous protocol buried beneath every naval system, designed to trigger not in the event of an attack, but in the event of recognition. It was designed to activate when a ghost returned, and now it had. The codename Lucid Violet spread like fire. People repeated it without knowing why, like a reflex, like breathing. But those who did know, those few who remembered what had been buried, they sat down. Because she hadn't been reactivated, she had never been decommissioned. On the deck of the submarine, a hatch opened. Not with hydraulics, not with fanfare. It simply yielded and outstretched a figure in full shadow, silhouetted by the moonlight against the matte steel of the vessel. A salute. 2 steps forward, then nothing. Down at Key South, she straightened, not rushed, not theatrical, just precise. And the man on the tower's mic whispered, "What do we do?" Captain Jarrell didn't answer right away. He was watching her. The woman they had mocked. The ID they had laughed at. The clearance they had erased. She was standing at the edge of the world, facing something no one had ever dared to submit to. "We wait," he said finally. Wait for what? But no one needed to ask. Because at 3,197, the second signal came through. It was smaller, quieter, and meant only for a few. Echo Black confirmed. Protocol shift. Observer status to the command link. Authorization code Lucid. Violet accepted. Then the power on base flickered. Not failed. Redirected to a windowless chamber beneath the hangars. Doors opened that hadn't been unlocked in decades. Lights that had never turned on flickered to life. A console booted. One screen, one interface, one prompt. "Welcome, Lucid Violet." And she hadn't even moved yet. When she finally stepped forward, her footfalls matched exactly the old security plate embedded in the dock. It was still there, hidden beneath 10 years of rust and algae. Her heel hit the activation point, and the dock responded. A mechanical arm extended from beneath the pier, unfolding like origami, revealing a clean, dry access bridge that hadn't been touched since the world was different. The bridge extended directly to the surfaced submarine. She walked. Every camera followed her now, not as surveillance, but like eyes unable to look away. In the tower, they whispered, "What is she?" No one answered, because it wasn't about what she was. It was about who had sent for her. The submarine did not flash lights, did not lower flags, and did not issue clearance. It had come for one reason only: to respond to the signal she had triggered, not with her voice, not with a beacon, but by being present. And it had answered with one thing: her code name. The Navy didn't move because the Navy remembered what Echolak meant. The helicopter arrived without warning. It didn't pass through civilian airspace. It didn't follow the approach. It didn't trigger the radar. It simply appeared, shadowing the coastline like a second storm. Black rotors, no insignia. The only visible mark, a single ring of silver paint around the tail. A signal understood only by those high enough to remember what had once been buried. It touched down near the command tower. No security, no entourage, just one man descending the ramp. Crisp uniform, boots like stone. Admiral Thorne, retired for 7 years, was last seen at a funeral closed to the public. His face was older now, drawn tight with something between disbelief and dread. He didn't speak as he entered the tower, didn't nod when saluted. He walked past the guards, past the officers frozen at their terminals, and paused only when he reached the main console. He looked at the live feed, the woman on the pier, the bridge extended to the submarine, and the code name glowing across every terminal on the base. He didn't ask what happened. He said only, "How long has she been here?" The watch officer swallowed. 11 days, sir." Thorne closed his eyes, then opened them with the weight of a man who knew exactly what that meant. She waited that long, he whispered, and we mocked her for it. In the sealed war archive beneath the base, a vault few knew existed, records were being reopened. Files with burn notices, protocols overwritten by newer, cleaner initiatives. But Echo Black was never erased because it couldn't be. It was woven into the lowest strata of the defense infrastructure, buried deeper than doctrine, designed not to be used, but to persist. There had been a time long ago when operations like this required shadows, before satellites, before biometric scans, when the most dangerous assets were not drones or machines, but people, ghosts, programs with names instead of numbers, silent code names, each linked to actions never recorded. Lucid Violet was one of them. The last, some said, was a prototype of living contingency, a human failsafe, someone who had not been assigned to a role, but embedded into history, ready to return if the unthinkable reemerged. And now here she was, alive, active, and walking straight toward the submarine without clearance or challenge. Thorn turned to the room, shut down all external comms. But sir, all of them now. He turned to the system's chief. Tell me, did she speak? No, sir. Barely said more than a sentence. She wouldn't need to, Thorn said. She was never meant to. He paused, then added more quietly. She's only here because something was triggered. Something old. Across the base, those who had mocked her now watched in complete stillness. The same guards who had laughed at her ID now stood silently at attention. The sergeant who had sent her to Key South now sat with his hands clenched between his knees, staring at the floor. One of them whispered, "Who is she?" And the answer came from a voice none of them had expected. "She's a ghost," said Lieutenant Maura Voss, Navy Intel Division. "A real one." Voss stepped into the room like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. She held a printed sheet in her hand. No electronics, no file, just paper, old and yellowed at the edges. My father was in the Arctic Protocol Branch during the Cold Silence Initiative. She said, "He told me about Ekalak when I was a child, just fragments, hints. He said they built something or someone that could never be compromised because no one could verify they existed. No paper trail, no photos, no record beyond whispers. When the threat level dropped, they shut the program down." Her eyes met Thorn's, but they never pulled her out. He nodded slowly. She refused to be extracted. Thorn said she'd wait, even if it took decades. Said she'd know when the call came. The room fell silent again. Outside, Lucid Violet, or whoever she once was, reached the submarine's deck. She didn't knock, didn't salute. She simply waited, and the hatch opened again. No one else saw what was inside. No cameras, no drones. But one thing was clear. The vessel was not crewed by standard Navy personnel. The faces inside were sharp, silent, their uniforms dark, devoid of rank. They stood not as soldiers greeting a superior, but as sentries saluting something holy. She stepped down. The hatch sealed. The sub did not move. It waited. Inside the war vault, Thorn reviewed one final file, a page marked Level Omega. On it, a crude map, a string of coordinates, and one note in ink. Only she may authorize the return. The location matched the place where the submarine had surfaced, which meant this wasn't a coincidence. She hadn't come to the sub. The sub had come because of her, because she had been reactivated. But no one could explain what reawakened the system. No satellites had been breached. No codes were manually entered. No distress beacons triggered. So why now? Thorn turned to Voss. You said your father worked in Arctic Protocol. Did he ever mention the fallback phrase? She nodded just once. Said it was like a myth, a line the system would respond to if ever heard again. She spoke it aloud, low and clear. Code life, never terminated, awaiting a signal from below. Across the room, one of the dormant terminals suddenly lit up. A symbol appeared. Not text, not numbers. A pulse. 3 beats, then the code name again. Lucid Violet. And finally, for the first time in 30 years, a system buried beneath the base, uncoiled, and began to speak. A file unfurled across the screen. Not a message, not an order, but a sequence. A chain of instructions so deep in the architecture of defense systems that even the Pentagon would need weeks to trace its origin. And at the end, one final line. One remained. One watched. Now she returns. Base Dagger Blue fell silent. Not from fear, but from understanding. Whatever she had been waiting for had arrived, and whatever mission had been embedded into her bones had begun again. The submarine never turned its lights on. It stayed there through the night, a monolith of black steel under moonlight, motionless against the current, as though anchored to the seabed by something older than weight. The tide shifted around it, winds picked up, but nothing moved that hull. And inside it, the woman they called Lucid Violet disappeared from every camera, every line of sight, every traceable thread. No engine started, no hum, no sonar ping, and yet by dawn, it was gone. No splash, no wake, just gone. Some swore they heard something deep beneath the ocean floor, like a distant machine restarting after years of sleep. Others said they saw a light blink once before it submerged. A pulse so low, it triggered migraines across every secured deck. But no recordings remain. Every frame is cut at 5:00 a.m. Every terminal reset itself at 5:01 a.m. The only thing that lingered was silence, and the memory of a woman who had waited 11 days in plain sight with an ID no one believed, and a code name that stopped time. The base was never the same. Orders came down from the top that same morning. All files referencing Echo Black, Lucid Violet, or Key South were to be removed from open systems. The Commandant was reassigned without explanation. Captain Jarrell submitted for early retirement 2 hours later. No one questioned him. The officers who laughed at her no longer spoke. Something about that moment at the pier had stripped language from their mouths. And the younger recruits, they didn't understand what they'd witnessed, only that something deep and irreversible had passed through their lives, like a shadow you never see again, but always feel behind you. The Key South platform was dismantled the following week, but no one watched. No one volunteered for the task. When the crane moved to lift the old steel arm, the same one that had unfolded for her to cross the water, its hydraulics failed twice. On the third attempt, the circuit board fried entirely. It was eventually cut loose and allowed to sink beneath the waves. No replacement was ordered. Lieutenant Voss requested access to the sealed Omega files 2 days later. Her request was denied, then denied again. The third time, the system returned a different message. Access acknowledged. Request no longer necessary. She never spoke about it, but her posture changed. She began watching the horizon during breaks alone, not because she expected someone to return, but because she now understood why someone might wait. Back in D.C., a review board met quietly behind closed doors. The minutes were never recorded. Only one note was found, handwritten on a torn piece of legal paper, pinned with a brass tack above the secure door. Echo assets do not retire. They withdraw until recalled. And at the bottom, a signature no one could verify. In the months that followed, strange signals were reported from the Arctic shelf. Buried equipment, once written off as lost, began responding again. Sensor buoys pinged in patterns long thought obsolete. One deep-sea antenna, thought destroyed in 1999, pulsed twice. Exactly 30 years to the day since Operation Cold Silence went dark. Navy analysts flagged the anomaly. The Pentagon dismissed it. but the signal repeated. Each time, 3 pulses, then silence. Some said it was atmospheric interference. Others claimed it was her. The men who mocked her never returned to that part of the fleet. Some asked for land duty. Others transferred without explanation. A few resigned altogether. None of them cited her in their paperwork. They didn't have to because after that night, they no longer remembered her as the woman with the strange badge, or the one who stood too still at the edge of the pier. They remembered her as the one the submarine obeyed, the one who didn't blink when the sea stopped breathing, the one whose code name silenced a Navy command room. And then there was Thorne. The Admiral never spoke of her publicly. But a month later, at the Naval Academy graduation ceremony, he paused during his speech. The script in front of him went untouched. He looked out at the cadets, cleared his throat, and said, "There are people you'll meet in uniform who wear every medal you've ever dreamed of. They will shine in the press, decorated, respected, visible." He paused. "And then there are the others, the ones you never see, the ones whose names never make it into history, not because they failed, but because their success was never meant to be known." He folded the paper. "Respect those people because some of them waited decades for the signal and never once asked if it would come. No one applauded, not out of rudeness, but because in that moment, the air felt too heavy for noise." That was the last time Thorne spoke in public. He retired fully the following week, disappeared from records 6 months later, and in the window of his small house on the coast, someone later saw a photo, black and white, blurred by age. It showed a woman standing on a steel platform looking toward the sea. No rank, no weapon, just silence. And beside it, a single line typed in block script was glued beneath the frame. Lucid violet, nothing more. Somewhere deep beneath layers of earth and encryption, Echo Black remained active, and one profile stayed unlocked. No birthday, no birthplace, no family, just coordinates, just a silence that reached across oceans, and the knowledge that if ever the signal came again, she would already be waiting. If this story moved you, if you believe some heroes operate where light cannot reach and silence means strength, then tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button. This is Graceful Valor Stories, and sometimes the most powerful legacy is the one nobody dares write down.